Welcome back to another episode. Today I have an exciting conversation with Spenser Molloy. He's a broker at a real estate firm up in New Hampshire with background in a lot of different industries, coming from vacation rentals to experience in commercial real estate and some boutique hotels. So exciting conversation we had today, just talking about Spenser's journey through vacation rentals and 2025 real estate market and just trends we've seen over the past few years that have shaped the industry and ultimately Spenser's journey.
Richards, what's going on?
Spenser, how we doing?
Doing well. It's been a busy Friday. 2 days into the new year. We're already off to a good start.
It sounds like it. You know, you're live on the Real Estate Lens. So welcome. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, super excited to try out this new call feature. So Spenser's, he called into the show, if you will, but we're talking over the phone. So excited to give this format a new try and mix in the theme of trying something new in 25. So excited to dive in a little bit with you and, what you have going on. I know you mentioned busy Friday, but you got all sorts of stuff going on, pivoting now to full-time real estate agent, coming from, some Airbnb management business and all sorts of other real estate ventures you have going on. So wouldn't mind if you could just give a quick overview on, what you have going on and your short, background story, if you could.
Yeah. So I started in vacation rentals after graduating college. I kind of didn't really have a path forward post-graduation. Kind of just kicked around, went back to my summer job there at Home Depot for a little while, and I kind of figured out my next steps. And a little precursor to this whole conversation, Ryan, I don't know if you're totally aware of this, but my entire family's in one form of real estate or the other. My dad's one of four. He does commercial, residential. One of my aunts, he does a little bit of residential and commercial, with him as a partner. I have another aunt who does like boutique hotels and Airbnbs. And then I have another uncle who's a financial advisor and does like commercial property on the side. So I've kind of always been raised in the real estate world. Everybody I'm related to and spend the most amount of time with, gets up in the morning and goes to work selling real estate, buying real estate, or using real estate to make money. So it's always something I've been familiar with, but wasn't, totally set on doing. And after college graduation, I had the opportunity to buy a vacation rental company that my aunt and uncle owned, prior to, me obviously taking over. And it was kind of my first segue into real estate through small, slow pace, not selling houses or anything like that, just renting short term. And the business was lakefront rentals. So we would take somebody's lake house and essentially do Airbnb arbitrage, but rather than doing it year round, pretty focused on just summer months. So the calendars would open in June, July, August, and then the majority of them would shut down, post summer. And then we'd spend the next, 4 or 5 months, maybe with only 1 or 2 year round, ski rentals. And then you pretty much spend all year booking the following summer. Something kind of unique about that space is that we never really had an issue filling the houses. It was always people kicking in the doors to, grab weeks that they've been trying to come, for months. I mean, in some cases, there were generations of families that have been coming to these houses. So from a new customer perspective, it was kind of overwhelming to say, I thought I'd have to be prospecting for renters and tenants and doing all this advertising. And then not having to do that kind of changed our focus a little bit to say, hey, what's going on here? Something's a little bit unique in terms of the clientele and the situation, the service we're providing, so how can we hone that? And ultimately what ended up happening is we got pretty comfortable with guests and owners, and we kind of felt out where our weaknesses and strengths are, like you would do in any business. And that led to, unfortunately, one of our owners, said, we really enjoyed working with you guys, but we're not keeping our house anymore. Would you be able to sell our home? And these are $1 million lake houses. And because we had, I should say, focused on just rentals, I never had sold a house, so I had to say no. And that was the last time I've said no to selling anything since. That's what opened, NextHome, which is what I do now, full time, helping people buy and sell homes, and then we do it ourselves.
I was going to say,
That's
knowing
how I got started.
knowing you, a no would be pretty tough, especially in the real estate space. That must have been a gut wrenching no for the first one for you to drop to them.
Yeah, talk about gut wrenching, and then it's not always all about money, but it's a $3 million house, so you figure that's a pretty nice commission check, to just give to somebody else, and support that other agent, which again we're happy to do, but we're the ones who've been in and out of the house, for 3 summers, and I could tell you everything that was wrong with it. It would have sold pretty fast. Those open houses would have been so efficient, but yeah, we had to let it go.
Sure.
But never again. We haven't done that since.
Right. I think from a service perspective too, you want to be there to be able to help your clients. So as much as, there's a facet of the business you couldn't help out from and are missing out on the revenue stream, it's also from a service standpoint. I always want to be able to help my clients with whatever direction they're going on the financing. And if for some reason I can't or don't have the resources, it's always, missed opportunity for me just to be able to continue to be the resource for them,
And it's a bummer. It really feels weird, in a couple different avenues. One, saying no to anything, unless it's like, atrocious, or illegal is, it feels odd to kind of utter those words. So, you're kind of, you're letting somebody down. And on the flip side, when then you add like a price tag to it, you're saying no, and you're saying, well, financially, this is not in my best interest. So kind of adds an extra motivation to be like, we're not going to do this again. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. It's different than if they said, do you want to mow my lawn? And you said, no, you could, but that's a little different.
Right. I'd almost rather them say, hey, we're going to use another agent, than them ask and you have to say no.
And in time frame wise, so obviously you were doing the Airbnb, and then you had this epiphany moment and started to segue into becoming a real estate agent, which you are full time now. And what context wise, when was that transition, and how has the transition been for you?
So I graduated in 2021. I got my agent's license by August of that year, took over the vacation rental business in August of that year. By that December or following January, roughly, I was a real estate broker, which is also a little bit unique in the sense that normally you have to sell 7 houses and jump through a bunch of these hoops to become a real estate broker. But I had done so many rentals that first summer with my license, the state of New Hampshire was actually super gracious and, says, as long as you can pass the test and complete all of these, educational requirements, we'll qualify the amount of rentals. We're talking 300-400 rentals.
Wow. Yeah.
For your transactions.
Yeah, and real estate,
we'll let you, become a broker.
That's the best kind of experience. So I'm glad they saw that too,
Yeah, it was kind of one of those shots in the dark of, is this going to work? That was the only way that was one of the conditions for purchasing the business was I had to become a real estate broker essentially as fast as possible. So my path into real estate's been like expedited and, 10 times as fast as maybe like a normal person's, segue was. But I've learned a lot doing it too.
And now, is your focus, so where you are today, I know obviously you're fully focused on the agent side of things. But I believe, you transitioned out of vacation rentals. So I guess what is making you decide that the real estate agent side is the direction you want to go in? Was there something that shifted on the market side as far as the vacation rentals? Was it just your personal preference? What was your decision-making process there to make, that switch? Because I feel like a lot of times people nowadays, especially, vacation rentals, Airbnb has that, that shiny object effect where people, glamorize the industry, and obviously it can, certainly be that glamorous in certain instances, or rather in, certain days or hours. But, I guess what made you make the transition from, that higher paced, I guess more volume type of business to the real estate side of things now, which has its own nuances to it?
A combination of all 3 things you said. I would say, in speaking very candidly here, I had a wake-up call of essentially, am I going to commit and grow this business full-time? And full-time in rentals means you are the maintenance guy, you are the plumber, you're the trash man, especially in short-term rentals. Long-term rentals, you get a little bit more downtime. It's like onboarding a new tenant every single week, in some cases every few days. and you're on the hook no matter what, even if you have support staff. I mean, when we first really got going, we had a team of like 25 cleaners. We had maintenance guys, contracted workers that just, constantly we filled, business with. But at the end of the day, if they're all busy or out on calls, you're the one doing it. Right. And to be honest, I can honestly say I've plunged more toilets and been further like stuck in trash more of the times than I would like to, be responsible for or own up to.
Sure.
And I had a realization of like, I don't know if I want to do it this way anymore. Like there has to be an easier way to do this. Now on the flip side, as I'm saying and complaining about standing in trash and plunging toilets, the paycheck was really good, right? The market back in 2021, 2022 was booming. Airbnbs were still, like the up and coming investment. It was a very lucrative way to make money. You didn't have to know a whole hell of a lot to buy an Airbnb, toss it on the platform. When I say Airbnb, I mean short-term rental in general, not just on that platform.
Sure.
But then what also happens, as we kind of move through 2021, 2022, things contracted a little bit. People didn't have, I think this is a nationwide thing too, but, people got a little bit smarter about where they were spending their money. COVID was gone. The whole world was opened back up. The people who would go to vacation in Europe or the islands or maybe take a trip to Florida, that was our primary business in 21 and 22. They said, we'll save the money. We'll go to, Lake Sunapee. We'll go to New Hampshire, spend the summer or the winter for skiing instead of going other places. Once COVID was safely in the past, we saw the numbers start to come down a little bit. Now, if I'd been a little bit more experienced, and this is, push number 2, which in hindsight, obviously you see things a lot more clearly. I would have been able to read those signs a little bit sooner, but I was so focused on making sure the business kept moving. I kind of lived in like this fairy tale world that, the money's great. It'll always be there. Like this is going to be good. And come summer 2022 at the end, we definitely saw a drastic drop between our first summer and our second. Fast forward in 2023, those numbers never rebounded at all. We just we stayed pretty stagnant. The same repeat guests are always going to come, but there was not a lot of new business. And the pipeline for lakefront homes, that was available to rent, like if you wanted to grow this thing exponentially, essentially meant you'd have to become a full-time property manager. You'd be responsible for the house year-round, mowing, plowing, all of it. And that was kind of the other thing is I'm not handy. You know this about me, right? Like I'm not the guy you call to go build a house. Right? So it kind of like, gave me a realization check of if I want to keep doing this, then I'm either going to have to learn these skills, which I don't have, or I need to make another decision. And ultimately, that's what led to my decision to kind of transfer into helping people buy and sell homes full time. We had that brokerage firm kind of in the background, but the vacation rentals was the primary focus. And this past fall kind of was like the nice equilibrium point to make that transition, wind one down and, really go to town on the other one.
Now, do you think that ultimate, market slowdown in the short-term rental space was more a function of supply, or was it also, I know you mentioned somewhat to do with just the overall, consumer sentiment? Like I think people's mindset shifted from a COVID world to a post-COVID world, and that directly affected Airbnb and short-term rental. But I feel like more often than not, when you talk to someone who might not be as ingrained in the space as you are and were, that they more so attribute it to like supply. The market's flooded with supply. But is it necessarily that it was supply, or do you think that fundamentally now there has been a shift in what's more desirable for people to stay when they're looking at vacations, whether it's, going away for a weekend? Is that short-term rental market still have as much demand, or did the demand actually go down at the same time supply did?
I know you're looking for a direct answer, but I'm going to give you two answers to that. I think Airbnbs have experienced what essentially Airbnb and Vrbo's did to the hotel industry when they first came out. Hotels stopped innovating, they stopped adding value, and consumers said, well, why am I paying for this when I can go and do this? I can rent a whole house and have all my friends come, or I can spend the same amount of money and rent one room with Wi-Fi I have to pay for in a building I might use the amenities once. I think Airbnb has got to a point where business was really good and the short-term rental industry was super lucrative. So short-term rental owners also stopped innovating and adding value, and they continued to raise prices. And consumers obviously are hypersensitive to what their discretionary spending, in my opinion, is being used on, right? You're dealing with people who say, if I'm going to allocate 10 grand of my hard-earned savings, I want to make sure I'm getting 10 grand worth of value. So I think we kind of crossed a path in 2022, 2023, and it's on everybody, vacation rental operators, owners. I think even guests to a standpoint, of paying so much that, everyone got, comfortable making that kind of money. But the service definitely, you didn't get anything extra for paying the $10,000. You got the same amount that you got last year and the year before. So I think people got worn out across the industry. I also think another contributing factor to this, obviously, supply and demand. Everybody and their mother, for the most part, that I feel like I've talked to in this area, either owned an Airbnb or explored having an Airbnb or had a cousin who did it. So when you flood a market with just mediocre product and then you charge relatively high pricing for it, you're going to dilute not only the market, but the experience people are having, which ultimately will push your customers away. So I think in our area, we experienced that kind of all at once. We had this rapid increase, and then we had this decrease, and now it's kind of plateaued. I don't think that's the same for cities. I think cities we're a pretty rural market. Cities like Charleston, South Carolina, or even Boston, Massachusetts, to an extent have it. I'm fairly familiar with the Charleston market. The cities regulated it so that supply couldn't get out of hand. So you only could have so much of an Airbnb presence in certain parts, which kept the demand, high because there wasn't enough to go around. So you always had that, intrigue of, hey, I really need to get one of these. But I think as a whole, essentially owners and operators contributed to the decline. If you offer value, people will come. If you can't constantly justify why you're charging something and offering that experience that people are becoming to expect every single time, you're going to lose market share. And it's not that people do it on purpose, in my opinion. You're renting these beautiful $1 million homes. There's really not much more in value you can add, unless you want to hire a chef, right, to come in and cook for you. You're kind of at the top end of what you can do. So people get bored and they move on.
That's interesting. I mean, I would agree in almost with most of what you said, in that I do believe in general consumers took a flight to value, across really all sectors, but I think especially, like you said, in some of these niche spaces like short-term rentals. So if you weren't providing that value, which to your point, it was difficult to get a higher product than, some of these high-end luxury homes. Like to your point, what else do you do? Unless you add some sort of, tailored amenity to the place, whether it's a themed home or, something relative to a specific type of outing, bachelorette, bachelor party, something like that. So it's definitely interesting. I've seen the dynamic play out on the Cape too. That's a market I'm, very familiar with, and very similar in that sense, where we have Airbnb short-term rental has seen occupancy or vacancy rates rather go up, because to your point, the market had been flooded with fairly mediocre product. So there's either, the way I see it now is if I was going to stay on the Cape today, I would either try to get into that high value product, that waterfront, luxury home, or I don't know if I would necessarily take an average experience in a mediocre home versus if I could just also stay in a boutique hotel or something that provides, honestly, probably better quality and maybe higher amenities. So it's either you're running into some push-pull competition in that, average space because, today's market is very supply rich.
And I think going off that too, I mean, back to adding value, you also have to be realistic. At some point, you're tapped out, and not recognizing that early on or early enough definitely contributes to the decline of anything. But also being smart enough to say, like, where's my, I'm at my max. I can't offer any more services. I can't do any more. It works where I'm, at, and it's been okay. Sometimes it is time to just close it up and be done. I'm referencing Airbnbs, but I mean, I would say I'm also in that same mindset I kind of had with the transition. You just get to a point where you say, I'm good. I can't do anymore.
Right. It applies to the operator as well, not just the value you're providing to, your end user, but in the same token to you as an operator. Like, for example, when you mentioned, becoming a good operator today in that space means essentially you're starting a property management company, adding in lawn care and, a full service team to upkeep the property definitely adds value from your standpoint to the end consumer, but to your operations as a business, that's a lot more intricate and a lot more expense to bring on to provide a value that might not outweigh the costs in all cases until you get to a point of scale where, you can start to justify the cost of bringing people fully in-house and, on your books. So I feel like there's some of that at play as well with the cost to deliver that value and the benefit as an operator to go for the highest value.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I would even add in there too, it all is about the bottom line, right? As greedy as that sounds, if you're not making money doing things, or if your Airbnb is not lucrative, your business isn't making money, etc., like you can't operate that way. So I think that's another piece that contributed to some of the decline here with Airbnbs. Is you had people who kept saying, well, next year it's going to do it. Next year it's going to make money. And then everybody kind of just realized at the same time, essentially, you can see it in the market. In some markets, they're gutted. Completely. If you look at Sunapee, we use this metric or this software called AirDNA. When we first got into it, the AirDNA overall score was a 99. This past fall, it was a 12.
Wow.
So we're talking 99 out of 100 or 12 out of 100 in 3 years.
Wow.
That's a pretty drastic decline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you had asked me, I wouldn't have projected that type of decline. But, if that is the case, then what do you, I don't want to put you on the spot, prediction wise or anything, like that. I'm going to, but I'm not going to hold you to it. What do you see as the opportunity right now, in real estate in general, real estate investing, given that, you've touched quite a few sectors, obviously as an agent now on the, buy sell side with residential and commercial property. I know you're even, we talked today, you're doing a little bit of business brokering as well and having experience in short-term rentals. You touch quite a few different facets of the industry. So is there one sector or subsector that you're most opportunistic about for 2025?
Again, with the two-part answers, I think that young people as a whole have an opportunity coming up to really start getting educated about real estate and building wealth. Not necessarily because they're going to come and buy a house, in the next 2 months. But I think there's a lot of conversations happening in the real estate space, especially because of the NAR lawsuit, but mostly because of the way the world is going today, where real estate is not something that's so taboo. And, if your parents never owned a home, then you're never going to own a home. Real estate agents, the National Association of Realtors, the industry as a whole seems to be in the media a lot more, so it's in front of people. And I think that it provides an awesome opportunity for, instead of, coming home and playing your video games, you might read a news article or you might do a little digging on, well, what do they mean by, there's a housing crisis? Or what does it mean that I'm a first-time home buyer and there's all these programs available? I think there's a real opportunity to educate a large population of this country and prep them and kind of pull back the curtain on, what it means to build wealth and an avenue of building wealth that has always existed, but it might have seemed a little bit more complicated or out of reach. I think pulling back that curtain and saying, no, it's not, it's kind of the next opportunity we're hitting. And we're starting to see it in our market up here in the Upper Valley. We're working with a lot of first-time home buyers, or maybe they haven't got necessarily qualified for a mortgage yet, but they're having a lot more conversations about, well, what could I afford? Who do I go to get a mortgage? How does this look? It just seems like that is kind of this new pool. And on the flip side, I think there's a lot of people who may have inherited homes, or there's that older generation that, purchased a home 40 years ago. And now they're saying, well, how am I using this? Can this add more value? Is this going to provide, something to leave behind when I'm no longer on this, world for my kids? I think there's just a lot more opportunity to get educated about real estate now than there has ever been.
And I think,
And I mean, you have all this tech to do it too.
right. And I think that's a super interesting point that I've started to think a little bit about, in the sense that I obviously, I know how the social media algorithm works. So I know everyone's feed doesn't look like mine, which is all real estate. But in general, to your point, the amount of real estate news and information that's been put out recently, with the NAR changes, with real estate home prices appreciating, the affordability crisis. I mean, all the headlines definitely create a mass awareness, which I think, to your point, gives people opportunities to be more educated, but at the very least makes them more conscious and aware of real estate as a sector in general. And I think not that people weren't aware of real estate, but more focused on how can they get involved in real estate, given, the market we've had over the past few years and the wealth that was created. So I look at it from that standpoint, with the question of, and I don't know if I know the answer fully, but I think we can see it in just the day-to-day real estate activities we're doing, in that with all of these people now more focused and educated on real estate, the more educated that buyers in any market, whether it's real estate or not, can be, the more qualified and likely they are to be purchasers and consumers of that market. So I feel like the demand, from the demand perspective, that fundamental of the market is definitely going to help prop up demand over the next few years. And in markets like the Northeast, where we don't have the supply to meet that demand and continual increase in demand, I think that plays an interesting dynamic that I would project to be fairly favorable for the market over the next couple of years.
Brian, what do you think about the whole publicity side of this whole thing? So going off what you just said, I think a lot of it has to do with how much the real estate industry is in the news and in media. And I think it also provides this context for, like, you have an easy on-ramp now to have some of these conversations that would have been pretty awkward, not even, maybe even 2 years ago. You wouldn't sit down at dinner, for example, and start talking about how you get qualified for a mortgage. Like, it just wouldn't have come up. But it seems like a lot of those things are coming up more, which then shifts, like, this whole prospecting model too, of, like, even trying to drum up business is not as hard as it used to be. It's not a cold call anymore. It's simply just talking about it and offering, your resource or expertise. Do you think that that's changed a little bit as well? Or do you think that's just a me thing? I mean, it could be a me thing. I'm known for that. But.
Well, no, I think definitely. I mean, I think even if you pull that statement back like 10 years, right? Like 10, 15 years ago, talking with my father and other people who've been in the industry for a long time, the dynamic of real estate, fundamentally, in terms of how real estate was traded, how real estate business was conducted, access to information, has dramatically changed, which I think is a part of the reason why we're seeing more access to conversation now, as a function of just the technology that's evolved. Properties now trade off market on Facebook groups. I mean, that's something that's only happened in the last 10, 15 years. So even in the last 5 years, it's definitely been accelerated with just the amount of access to real estate and real estate information. So, to your point, I think definitely that's been a catalyst to a lot of the demand that we've seen over the past few years, is just the access to information, where, I feel like if you watch, an older movie or older show that's focused around real estate, or you talk to someone who's been in the industry for a while, real estate had that. I mean, the MLS literally used to be a book. Like, you had to get a, multiple listing service book with all of the listings in your area that only the realtors had. You had to go to the real estate office after going into the bank to get pre-approved for a loan. So because of those, I guess, physical challenges and limited access to information, real estate took more of a hyper focus on a certain, subset of buyers. So typically, it didn't have as wide of a reach. So I think, to your point, with technology nowadays, everyone has access to real estate information, to properties available for sale, to off-market properties available for sale, for investor groups, for investor information. So I think that's definitely put real estate in the spotlight because it's more accessible.
What do you think that has to do with prospecting? I mean, given what you just said, do you see, and I'm just asking this question because I'm curious, I feel like I haven't really prospect for business. I know that sounds weird for, a real estate agent to say, out loud, like I really haven't had to cold call or send, drip emails or that kind of stuff. Just by talking and, interacting with people, business has kind of come our way. Are you seeing that in the mortgage industry? I mean, to your point, like, you don't have to go into a bank anymore. There's no reason to establish that in-person connection. It's mostly done online, and then you meet as kind of like the follow-up. You talk about, what you're looking for and, what your goals are overall with the transaction. But the majority of that, I mean, I've had clients I've met in person maybe 2 times. It's done over Zoom or phones or texting. Like, that in-person experience is kind of the secondary. I think that kind of solidifies it. But I'm just curious how, on the mortgage side of things, if that's similar, or are you guys still doing it the old-fashioned way?
Well, no, that's an interesting point. And I think, my answer to that is similar to the overall theme of our conversation with like the flight to value. So, one thing I think, you and I do a really, good job of is conveying the value that we have for, the consumer or our clients. So I think when people now are looking for a real estate agent or a loan officer, they're not calling the loan officer that they see in the newspaper. Like that type of advertising, I don't think has as much merit anymore, where people now are looking towards value and expertise. So, you might not necessarily prospect to the extent of sending out mailers or, cold calling for potential clients or listings, but by projecting your value through social media or through just general conversations, and, actions too. I mean, obviously you're, very active as a real estate investor, as a real estate entrepreneur. So just your actions alone provide, that perception of value, which it's valuable to have someone who has experience. So I think that fundamentally is a self-promoter in a lot of ways now. Partially, again, because information's so much more accessible. You can put out a picture or post of you, doing real estate activities or doing your business and showing the value that you bring. And that trust creation, I think, is what's really most important in the industry today and what people are most looking for, as opposed to just looking for a service, where they would be more advertisement focused. This is more of a value-driven search, which I don't think he has to promote in the same way. I think that can almost come naturally in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how those overlap. I mean, mortgage, obviously, and real estate, you're kind of all in the same sphere, right? People can't buy a house without a mortgage, and vice versa. The mortgage industry wouldn't exist if people weren't buying houses. But it's kind of neat that that's all like things almost at the same time. Two completely symbiotic industries, but obviously they're different in their own respects. Had this huge change in prospecting and how we do business. Almost within the last I'd say 5 to 6 years. Completely. Yeah. Like when the internet really, really got taken off, and we had this infrastructure there. It's like, I bet when doing this way in 2010, were we? Or were you guys?
Not the same. No, not the same. I think honestly, I think it's for the better in a lot of ways, where it's challenging people now who want to succeed to stand out amongst, the noise, because there's, I don't know, millions of realtors posting on social media. There's millions of loan officers posting on social media. So how do you differentiate yourself? And it's, through projecting that value, showing people you have experience, you know what you're talking about, you'll be a good advocate for them, which overall I think is better for the industry, as opposed to, how many postcards can I send out to get this client? That's not really as self-motivating to, get better at your craft. So I do think it's a good thing, and we'll probably continue to see, more competition as the market continues.
Now that you got my brain moving, and I'm turning the tables, I know this is your podcast and not mine, but I've got another question for you. Sure. What are your thoughts on the NAR lawsuit? Like, just high-level initial thoughts, good, bad, doesn't really make a difference. I don't know if you and I have ever actually discussed that and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, overall, Obviously, it's definitely a topic of conversation today. But, I think I say that. It's funny how fast it went in the rearview mirror, huh?
It's already, yeah. That was last year in August. We're almost coming back up on that, anniversary.
And it's true. And I think it was, more, I guess, candidly speaking, it was a money grab by those, group of sellers who contested the way things have always been done for the testament of time. And, I don't know, I guess in terms of how it affected the market, I mean, I would say I haven't seen any effects really. I mean, aside from the fact that, some states are no longer allowing you to advertise the buyer's agent commission, that has to be something that's talked about and negotiated upon. I mean, out of the 130 clients we helped this year, I would say maybe 4 or 5, not percent, 4 or 5 people, had to actually pay the majority of the commission for the real estate agent, the buyer side, if that. A very, very small amount, had an impact as a result of that change. But I think, fundamentally it was always a negotiation point. I mean, you always had to negotiate, with your real estate agent, your representative, to determine what you were going to pay them and who was going to pay them and how. So I don't know that it necessarily protected consumers anymore. I think, sure, it's good to have the conversation, but was that change needed to do that? I don't think that it really, accomplished what they, at least the lawmakers say it was supposed to. But I think the conversation, is, I guess, helpful to reinforce that piece for consumers, that it is negotiable. But I don't think it was necessarily as impactful just by the decisions that were made,
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was a little bit of a money grab, for sure. One of the interesting things about, my segue into, this whole buying and selling and helping people do it, my first year really doing this was corresponding with the August 17th deadline. Our first 3 transactions last year were done in anticipation of operating under those new guidelines and rules. And so I really don't have, a ton of experience in doing it the other way. Prior to August 17th, one of the interesting things we've noticed is a lot of our clients, when you do out the math, actually have saved money doing it the new way than versus the old. And obviously we can't talk too much about commissions, et cetera, but we've done, and we're not, selling 1 million homes, a year, or 100 homes a year. So it's really easy to sit down to clients and say, well, how does this go? If you had to pay all these things versus not. And because it's been brought to the forefront of negotiations and it's a little bit more known, I would say, or at least from the agent perspective, we're obligated to tell the clients about it. That's led to conversations where in some cases they're saving a substantial amount of money that they would have just paid, because they didn't know any difference, prior to August 17th. So I think that's one good thing that came out of it. I don't know if it made, that big of a difference. But I think, again, getting back to the whole publicity side of things and more attention on the industry, it definitely in the long run, because you could say, well, what is this? Simply because you have the prompt, I think it's been working out for clients pretty well. And I wonder if some of those 4 or 5 clients you're referencing were some of ours, because I know we've been a little challenging this year, but it's been really interesting to see it play out. I was just curious, what you thought.
Yeah, no. And I'd say, to that point too, I think the visibility of it definitely, in my eyes, is a help to real estate agents in a way, because it challenges you to, again, bring that value, show someone why you're worth the cost that you're worth. So for, good agents with a lot of value, or good professionals in general, I mean, any service you go to, go to purchase or get involved in, you want to know the value. So if there's a cost associated with it, you need to know that that value is justified. So I think it challenges people to, again, level up and become better to be able to, 1, bring the value, and then 2, relay that to the customer.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting in 2025 as the market kind of comes back a little bit. We've got some transitions going on in the world, overall. I'm very excited to see how this all plays out at scale, for a full year.
No, likewise. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time today. I know you got plenty going on in your world today, but I want to say thank you, for hopping on. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm sure we'll have many more, conversations like this in the future. And for those of you who don't know, Spenser and I, this type of conversation is pretty common for him and I. So I'm excited for the next one.
Can I do a little plug on here too, Ryan?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, for everybody listening to this podcast, if it wasn't for Ryan and North Point Mortgage, we would not be growing at the scale that we're growing. Obviously, being a new brokerage firm in the area, no matter how many connections you have, it's about delivering a product and having a team to deliver that product to your clients. So whether my entire family's been in real estate, for XYZ amount of time in our area, it's really been the difference of the fact that all the loan officers, North Point, and in this case, Ryan, really have been a huge difference in getting our clients across the finish line. And in many cases, a lot of our clients this year have started other places and found out that perhaps we should get some, more knowledgeable expertise on, one of the biggest purchases we'll make in our entire lives. And working with Ryan and the feedback we've received has been phenomenal. So I hope that other people listening also pick up the phone and call Ryan to help, because he really has made the difference for us. And Ryan, I don't mean that in an advertisement kind of way. We are very grateful for, your partnership in this. It's been awesome.
No, I appreciate that. And likewise, I mean, I think we make a great team, but, like to your point too, it's really important to have people with experience and value on your team. And I'm excited for, the prospect of 2025 and what we have in store, and to continue to deliver, the highest products with you guys.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. I appreciate it.
All right, likewise. Well, enjoy your Friday and your weekend, and sure I'll catch up with you soon.
You as well. We'll talk soon.
All right, talk soon. Thanks, Spenser.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. So hope you enjoyed that conversation with Spenser. Spenser is, I would say, one of the more knowledgeable people in the real estate sector that I've had the chance to work with and get to know. So definitely a guy you'll want to follow along and stay in touch with, or reach out to if you need some real estate advice. So I'll drop all of his contact information in the show notes below. And as always, looking forward to seeing you on the next.